Hi, Marco Di Stefano here, and welcome to this video in which I will showcase the template, the orchestral template which I just finished to set up. Let me explain you what you see here is mainly a Cubase, and what you see this small window on the right is from Lemur. Okay, so let me first of all start with the template in action. Okay, I will try to do that in 1 minute, and then I will go into the detail how it works. So as you see here in Cubase, there is nothing but these nice buttons. If I click them, they will open the different sections so far. So you can see there is some woodwinds, brass, strings, and some section mix. I don't have yet the percussions, but I'm working on it. Then, for example, let's suppose that I want to play something, I want to record something for piccolo flute. So I go here in Lemur, I change page. These you can see, these are all the instruments I have. I click on the piccolo flute buttons and it gets loaded automatically into Vienna Ensemble Pro. So now if I do play something, you hear it. Going farther, there is another tab, which is the VST control, where you can see here I have all the dynamics, for example. Voila. Vibrato. And the microphones, I can, for example, load the close microphone and the ambient. And of course I can do this also selecting more than one track, and it will apply to all the tracks. Another thing which is very exciting is the articulation. So you can see in this page here that I have all the articulation loaded, and just clicking here. So I will go with the harmonics. Flutter. So I can trigger the change of the articulation in Kontakt by my interface here in Lemur. And then, of course, depending on the track which I selected, the articulation change. So now let's suppose that I want my oboe playing. So I go there, I enable the oboe, I play, I go in articulation, legato. Voila, that's mainly it. So now let me unload everything and let me explain you how all this works. First of all, I think that there is no better way than explaining this than using this PowerPoint. So I'm using Cubase. In Cubase, my main input are my piano and my keyboard and mouse. And as I've showed just right now, I'm also using Lemur for in and input within Cubase. Then I have also Vienna Ensemble Pro, which actually is hosting instances of Kontakt where I load my Spitfire audio. So this is a very basic architecture, which I think it's quite common to all the people I've seen around. I must say that for the Lemur project, I actually reused a lot of the work which was already done by another composer, which I found on internet. You find the link to his channel down in my description. So to give credits that he made a great work on Lemur. What I did is actually I extended the work he did. I made some correction and I adjusted more to work with all my Spitfire audio libraries. So now let's go a bit deeper into the components of this architecture. And I will start by showing you how, Cubase first. So in Cubase, I decided to have all the instruments in the same order as they will be in an orchestral score. So starting with woodwinds, brass, and as you can see, now Cubase is loading. So as you can see, so then I split into highs and low. So we have a piccolo flute, alto flute, then flutes are 2, piccolo, so here is just some combination, oboe, corne anglais, yes, and then so on. And so the first things that I implemented into Lemur is the capability to toggle the visibility of these tracks. And then with these buttons that you see here, I can click toggle woodwinds and make it appear. Then what happens is that if I, for example, do some recording on these tracks, which by the way now there is no sounds loaded. So what happens is that when I toggle the visibility, the tracks for which there is some MIDI content stays. And that's very important. So how does it work? Again, I can show you here on the architecture. So the visibility of the track, simply, it's something that goes from Lemur into Cubase. And so it's a very simple flow. For me, in my case, I decided to have some not on events, which are recorded here in the generic remote on this one, on the second. So you can see that here are the 4 different buttons. So not on, toggle, woodwinds, brass, strings, and mix. For each of them, there is a command that is implemented in the project logical editor. And what is there? Let me show you. So for example, toggle strings, what does it do? It says that whatever work with any container type which is equal to a track, where the name of the track starts with an S, contains an S, like with this format, and where is empty. In that case, what you do is that you toggle the hide control. So it's very simple, and now this actually explains the reason of this naming convention. So the W that you see starting here on the woodwinds, then on the brass you see that everything starts with a B, and on the strings everything starts with a S. Simply because from here I can implement these specific functions to toggle the visibility. I'm sure that you will be also interested on how the mixer is set up. So you can see here that there are a lot of different audio tracks. These are not MIDI tracks, because from here you can see that MIDI channels, these are disabled. These are instrument channels. But in order to explain you this, I first need to open via Vienna Ensemble Pro and to show you how it is configured. What you can already see that, let's delete this track here first. What you can already see here is that on the right you have 4 different racks, one for each of the sections. So you have one that is Vienna Ensemble Pro for strings, woodwinds, brass, and the mix. Now if we open Vienna, so you can see that I have 4 main instances, and in each of these instances you have all the instruments loaded. So meaning that for each specific channel here, if we, for example, we need to open the piccolo flute, so let's just load it. What you see in here is that inside you have one instance of Kontakt with all the instruments related to the piccolo flute. So in that case, you have the piccolo flute with the full techniques and with the legato. And then of course, each of them, they are locked to UACC, so I can control the articulation and switch from them. Because as you can see, the MIDI channel is the same for all of them. So if we see another one, which is maybe a bit more interesting, is the chamber strings. Yeah. Here you can better understand what happens. So you have 1, 2, 3, 4 different instruments loaded, which all refer to the violins 1. So the sum of all these 4 instruments give me the full palette of articulation of the violins 1 for this symphonic chamber. All of them, they are locked to UACC, and I can switch the articulation easily from one to the other. All of them are in the same channel, and so in that case what you see here is that I am on the Vienna Pro plugin MIDI 1 of the strings. So if we go back into Cubase and if we open strings, voila, here it is, MIDI 1, 6. Another thing which is important to look at in Vienna is that then each of these instruments is configured to have a specific output. In that case, for example, you have the output 11, 12. So then if you look at this one, the output 11, 10 is this one, which actually appears here somewhere. Output 11, 12. Where is the... Yeah, there are really a lot. Voila, here it is this one. So this way, each instrument which I have here has a MIDI track, has a corresponding output, audio output. Let me then show how I've built the mixer. So here, this might look a bit complicated, but let me try to explain it easily. So we have groups. What I decided is that so because each library is different from any other in terms of how it has been recorded, dry or wet, I decided to have one group per each section per library. So in that case, this is the Spitfire Symphonic Woodwinds, Albion 3 Woodwinds, Albion 5 Woodwinds, Orchestral Swarm Woodwinds, and so on, and so on for all these groups. These are groups. And then you see that, for example, my Symphonic Chamber Strings Violins 1, it's redirected to this one, this Symphonic Chamber Strings. And so, for example, also all the chamber strings are redirected to the group chamber strings. All the symphonic strings are redirected to the group symphonic strings. All the Albion 3 celli, they are redirected to the strings of the Albion 3. But then if we look, for example, at the other Albion 3, so there should be, for example, here Albion 5 woodwinds. These are Albion 5 woodwinds. So then what I do is that at the beginning I group all the different woodwinds instruments for per instrument per library type, and then I merge all of them into the single woodwinds, brass, strings, and mix. So all of the libraries woodwinds then goes into the group woodwinds. All of the libraries brass, all the groups brass goes into brass here. So this allows me to play with the reverb and apply, for example, a different reverb depending on each specific library, and then still have the possibility to have another tweak and level of reverb by group here. So this is all about the configuration between Cubase and the Vienna Ensemble Pro. We also see how the mixer works, and we have seen a bit of the automation that is in place into Lemur. Okay, let me now show you something which is very cool, because I don't have 256 gigabyte of RAM, which I suppose is the same for many of you. So, and then you might wondering, how does it work? How can I have all these instruments loaded? Because actually they are not loaded, because as we have already seen, they are disabled. So at this stage, if I go here, I see that my memory is very low. But it's quite boring if every time I want to use an instrument, I have to go and click and enable this. And this links to what I showed you before, the capability to activate and deactivate tracks directly from Lemur. So here I created this page where there are all my instruments. Every time I click on something, I got the instrument loaded into Vienna Ensemble Pro. So how does it work? Again, it's very simple. Let me show you with this one. So here in Lemur, I have all these buttons. All of these buttons, I managed to have assigned to it one specific control change, which is pushed to Cubase, and which then is transformed into one specific trigger of a certain parameter in Vienna Ensemble Pro, which will do the job. So if we want to see how does it work here in Lemur, first of all, this one, all these buttons are managed here into my setup. So you can see that each of these entry in my generic remote is specific to is related to a specific button. And then, for example, let's take the piccolo flute, is this MIDI channel at this address. What it does is that it goes into the Vienna Pro and it triggers a specific parameter, which is parameter 1 on the Woodwinds instance. So what does that mean? If we now look into Vienna Ensemble Pro and we go into Woodwinds and we show the automation, you can see that the parameter 1 is the piccolo flute enable disable. So as you can see, here I have all the list of instruments. For each of them I need to have one parameter, and I have this for all the different instances, so related to the brass and related to the strings. And each button in Cubase is set up so to trigger one specific parameter. For example, again, if we look at the horn here, and then we can find it here, is the parameter 1 of the instance brass. And then, for example, the wood slow here is the parameter 24 of the woodwinds. So if now we go into Vienna Ensemble Pro and we look at the automation, we say 24. Voila, here it is. Orchestral swarm, wood low. So with that, again, it's just magic, because if now, for example, let's look at the strings, and if now I want to load violins 1, I just click on violins 1 and it gets loaded. It's just fantastic. I want also violins 2 to be loaded. I click on it and here it comes. So this really gives you the power to have a skeleton of orchestra in front of you. So you really have all the instruments. They are not in memory and you can recall them as every time you need them. And this combined with the capability to trigger the articulation from here is just it's just like having a real orchestra in front of you. So then last things to show you is how does it work, the management of the articulation. So first thing is that each instrument has an expression map. I suppose that you know what expression map is. I managed to create all the expression maps for all the libraries I have, even if I started from some which I got from internet. So you can see, for example, for the piccolo flute, this is the expression map, which triggers specific control change for each articulation. And what you see here is the remote, which is set to program change message, meaning that if there is a remote controller which is sending the program change for, this will trigger this specific articulation. And this is exactly what happens with Lemur. Lemur is set up so that in each of these buttons that you see in the interface here, each of these buttons there, they are specific program change. Now the question will be, how can you manage to have these articulation changing with the track as far as the track is selected? So there is not a very easy way to do that, but anyway, what the workaround is not that difficult. So there is, you just have to manage to have a generic remote which is sending to Lemur. I call it track selection exactly this way. So MIDI status controller 1 sending a controller change 127 transmit, track selection on the MIDI mixer selected, and this is the selected one. So whatever something is selected in the interface, it sends a MIDI channel, a MIDI control change signal 126 to Lemur. Then Lemur, what it does, let me show you better probably here. Okay, so then first of all, Cubase sent the control change 126. Lemur is configured so that when it receives 127, it sends back to Cubase another control change 127. In Cubase, each track is configured so that when it received control change 127, it sends a specific polypressure signal with some specific parameters, which then are received by Lemur are processed, and the interface of Lemur is updated with the right with the specific articulations. And then whatever you click on some of the buttons that you see on the interface here, it triggers the program change, when then goes back again into Cubase. And as we have seen with the expression map, this is transformed into a control change, which goes in Vienna and then in Kontakt, making the change of the articulation. I hope that this diagram explains well the concept. So let's maybe see how it works concretely. We have already seen that in the studio setup, you need to have a generic remote, which is sending a specific control change 126 to Lemur. In Lemur, as I said at the beginning, I reuse a lot the work done found on internet, so you find the details in the description. And then what there is a function here which says whenever I receive a signal control change 126, then send back a control change 127. And then when I'm on a specific track, I'm using a transformer. So I have a MIDI send here that is saying whatever you are receiving a control change 127, then send a polypressure with value 4. So very straightforward. And then, of course, as you can understand, each of these track has its specific number which then is decoded by Lemur and is used to update the user interface of Lemur. So this is mainly done in this interface where you can see that say, so for example, in that case, if I'm receiving on the channel 1, then the channel 1, which as you can see is set here for the woodwinds, is the channel 1. If I receive on the channel 1, then take the list of articulation from this variable, which is bank.channel woodwinds high plus this number here, which is exactly the polypressure that we set up in the track. And if we go and look and search for this variable, so we can see which is bank, voila, and here it is. So if you see, this is an array which contains the name of the track, 0, which is something that I will explain you now, later on. And then all these name of articulations, which are the ones which are copied into each of these button here. So I know it's not that easy, this part, but I hope it's a bit clear what I'm saying. And so then what does it mean? That if I click on a track, each track has a specific channel and specific polypressure number, which is making Lemur updating the interface based on this number. The last things that I want to show you is how I managed to have this part here of Lemur, which is all the VST controls. So in this case, I decided not to go with that dynamic changing, dynamically changing the content of the faders depending on the libraries, because each library is different. Sometimes you only need 4, sometimes you need 6, sometimes you have only 3 mics, sometimes you have 7. And so I decided instead to have different tabs. As you can see here, there are tabs for the woodwinds, for the brass, for the strings, for all the different libraries which I have. And then what I do is that Lemur is dynamically selecting the right tab when something gets selected here. For example, now if I go to for example Albion 5, you can see that in Lemur the tab Albion 5 got selected. If I go to Orchestral Swarm, you can see that the tab gets selected, and as you can see, each one has its own microphones, has its own specific sets of faders. The only two ones which always stay the same, these are the dynamics and expression. And so what I did in this case is that I really managed to create one specific page with all these faders for each of the library that I have. Now, if we want to play a bit with it, let's say, for example, that I want to write something and I want to start with a piccolo flute. And I want to first have legato. Okay, let's go. Record. Okay, cool. And then let's say that, for example, okay, I'm done with the woodwinds. I don't need any more woodwinds, but now I would like to have some strings. And what do I want to have as strings? Let's suppose that I want some chamber strings, the violins. Voila. And I load them, I click, and now I can select my track here. So now it's, I suppose it's on legato. Let's put on the long. Let's change to something cool. This one, tremolo. Voila, and then I go back here and I record. Let's go in the VST control so that I can also change the dynamics. Voila, this is, of course, this is not a nice composition, but it's just to show you. And then I can also go and take. So what do I want to have from brass? For example, I would like to get these horns 6. So it gets loaded, and you can see in my memory here. Where is it? Voila, you can see that now I have 7 GB of memory, and then I can play. Okay, let me change the articulation. Okay, let's go and record again. Maybe let's change the dynamics. Voila. So then I can toggle everything and I have only what I need. Okay, cool. So I hope that I was not too quick. I think it's there is really a lot here. It took me weeks to implement that. So your comments are more than welcome and I can reply to them. And if you think I should make one specific video to explain in more in detail one of the part, let me know. By the way, I will put in the description the videos which I refer to, that I really use like inspiration, and also for which I reused actually the Lemur project. I will plan soon to also share all my expression maps. As I told you before, all these expression maps, here they are. I have expression maps for many libraries from Spitfire Audio. I have about 20 Spitfire audio libraries, and I have made about 10 expression maps, which are the most interesting ones. So let me show you my libraries here. I have Albion 3, Albion 4, 5, the new Chamber Evolutions, Spitfire Mass, Bernard Herrmann Composer Toolkit, London Contemporary Orchestra Strings, and then I have all from the symphonic series, so woodwinds, brass strings, chamber strings, Simfire Strings Evolution, Orchestral Swarm, percussion, Hans Zimmer percussion, and other which we don't see here because they are, but these are the main ones actually. Okay, so thank you very much. Hope you will enjoy this video and see you in the next one.